Have you ever looked at an On This Day in History page, like the one shown here? You usually get a vertical scroll of dates and facts that seem to have nothing to do with each other. Looking at the entries for May 4th, we jumped from an 18th century king dying in battle straight to the massive construction of the Panama Canal, and then we somehow land at the very first Grammy Awards. Historians look at these lists as a series of related signals. They search for the shared momentum behind the dates to understand how one event creates the conditions for the next. We can see these connections by focusing on three specific factors: the individual motivations of the people involved, the mechanical tools they used, and the secondary consequences of their actions. When we look through these lenses, a static list of trivia becomes a map showing how our modern world was built. Now, let's apply it to May 4th. In 1799, the Indian subcontinent was a patchwork of powerful regional kingdoms. European empires were pushing to secure profitable trade routes, while local leaders thought to protect their own territory. That brings us to our first date. On May 4th, 1799, Tipu Sultan was killed in battle. He was the ruler of Mysore, and he represented a major sovereign obstacle to British expansion in southern India. Following his death, the British strategy changed. In 1800, they established Fort William College in Kolkata to train administrators in local languages, shifting their focus from military conquest to exerting influence through law and culture. But local culture creates its own resistance. By 1849, we see the birth of Jyotirindranath Tagore. He became a playwright and musician who used the arts to fuel an intellectual awakening in Bengal, reclaiming a cultural identity that colonial institutions had sought to manage. Profiling these historical individuals shows a distinct transition. The struggle for control in India moved from the physical battlefield to a competition over who would define the region's education and art. To understand the next leap, we have to look at the tools humans use to bridge distances. On May 4th, 1904, the United States officially began building the Panama Canal. This historical photograph shows the raw physical scale of the project. The engineers sliced through a jungle mountain range to connect two oceans, pouring massive concrete trenches directly into the earth. The project's success relied on the lock system. Think of a lock as a water elevator. A ship enters a closed concrete box, water floods in to float the vessel upward, and it sails out onto higher ground. This shortcut meant cargo ships no longer had to sail thousands of extra miles around the southern tip of South America, drastically reducing the time it took to move goods across the globe. Analyzing this technology shows how engineering began to override geography. We were no longer limited by the shape of the continents. We began reshaping the planet to facilitate faster trade. To finish the picture, we have to look at the human cost of these changes. Every major shift in how the world functions involves a specific sacrifice. In 1799, the trade-off for India's eventual integration into the global British trade network was the loss of regional independence and political sovereignty. We see a different trade-off in Panama. The canal created an enormous economic shortcut, but constructing it cost the lives of thousands of laborers who died from malaria and yellow fever in the jungle. As the decades passed, the focus shifted from physical shortcuts to digital ones. May 4th, 1942, marks the birth of Sam Pitroda, who later spearheaded the development of India's modern telecommunications infrastructure. These digital networks meant that by May 4th, 1959, the first Grammy Awards could celebrate music that, for the first time in history, was capable of being broadcast and heard around the world nearly instantly. Reading history clearly means acknowledging this tension. Progress is a record of how we gained global connection, often at the expense of local autonomy or human life. The random entries on our initial list now sit within a broader context. We can track a clear change in how humans relate to one another over these 160 years. We moved from local rulers defending physical territory in 1799 to engineers reshaping the earth for trade in 1904, to a world where digital networks allow a single song to reach every continent at once. History is simply the study of how all these individual moments created the specific conditions of our life today. Pick any date on the calendar and look at the events that happened. Try to find the individuals, the tools, and the trade-offs that link them. When you look for these patterns, you can begin to see exactly how your own modern world was put together.